Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin this special session on nuclear dangers in the Asia-Pacific. My name is Mark Fitzpatrick. I'm the Director of the Non-Proliferation and Nuclear Policy Program at the IISS. I'm also the Executive Director of the Washington office of the IISS. I'm delighted that this panel is comprised of four experts who represent countries directly involved in what is the principal nuclear danger in Northeast Asia, and then a representative from an outside power that increasingly is playing an important role in this and other regions. We're going to begin with Mr. Shigeo Yamada, who is the Cabinet Councillor at the National Security Secretariat of Japan. The National Security Secretariat serves as the focal point of creating Japan's foreign and national security policies. Mr. Yamada is from Japan's Foreign Ministry. He served in the most important posts of the Japanese diplomatic service, being Beijing, London, and Washington. He will be followed by Major General Retired Dr. Yunzhu, who is Director Emeritus of the Center on Chinese-American Defense Relations at the Academy of Military Science of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. She joined the PLA in 1970 and has, I think, primarily held various research, instructor, academic, and leadership roles in the research areas in the PLA. She has a PhD in military sciences. She's been a visiting fellow in London and at Harvard. But to me, she's most well known as a leading voice at the Shangri-La dialogue, where for several iterations she has lent her perspective and expertise to discussions here. Third will be Major General Retired Jungyul, a professor of University of North Korean Studies and Policy Committee Vice Chairman of the Democratic Party in the Republic of Korea. Now, the Democratic Party, as you all know, is the party whose standard bearer, Moon Jae-in, won the presidential election in South Korea last year. So the important point here is that he is not a government representative, but he's a party representative of the party now in power. He's a Director General of the General Headquarters, Head of National Defense and Security for the Democratic Party. And then lastly, Jean-Christophe Belliard, Deputy Secretary General and Political Director of the European External Action Service, asked to go last to provide an outside perspective to these issues. He's held his position since last September. He comes from the French Foreign Ministry, where he had postings in several tropical climates in Africa and in Washington. He was ambassador to Madagascar, among other diplomatic postings, and he served previously in one important position in the European service as a personal envoy for Secretary General Javier Solana. So let's dispense with preliminaries and ask Mr. Yamada to start us off. And oh, by the way, this rules of engagement, we're on the record. And each speaker will speak for 5 to 6 minutes, and we will end promptly at 6:15. So anybody who's talking at 6:15, I'll have to cut you off at that point without any insults to your speech. So please, Mr. Yamada.
Thank you very much. And first, I'd like to thank IISS for including me in this prestigious special session. And North Korean nuclear and missile capabilities have improved dramatically, and it poses serious new level of threat to Japan. The missile launched on May the 21st was apparently a solid fuel mobile missile, which was difficult to detect in advance. And the launch on May the 14th was conducted on the so-called lofted trajectory. That makes the re-entry speed faster, making it difficult to intercept for any anti-ballistic missile defense system. In March, North Korea launched 4 missiles simultaneously, and 3 of them landed within Japanese exclusive economic zone. And on Monday this week, they launched another ballistic missile, again landed in Japanese exclusive economic zone. Last month, North Korean media published an editorial titled, "Japan is within our strike target area," and declared, quote, "All of our strike capabilities, including already deployed nuclear weapons, are targeted at the US mainland and US bases in Japan." On Monday this week, North Korean Foreign Ministry spokesperson issued a statement saying that they would change targets in Japan, presumably to include civilian targets beyond US bases in Japan, if Japan continues current policies. With North Korean nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons capabilities, we have to take seriously the threat posed by North Korean use of weapons of mass destruction against Japan. The Japanese government is strengthening our defense posture, including through enhancing our ballistic missile defense system, as well as by strengthening Japan-US alliance. And in this regard, we highly appreciate the reiteration or the reassurance of US security commitment to Japan by the Trump administration, including through extended deterrence. In dealing with this North Korean threat, the trilateral cooperation among Japan, the United States, and the Republic of Korea is crucially important. And in recent months, this trilateral security cooperation has deepened significantly, and various trilateral exercises have been conducted, including the missile warning exercise in March and the anti-submarine exercise in April. We would like to further deepen this trilateral security cooperation under the new ROK government. China accounts for 90% of North Korea's foreign trade, and in that capacity, China has a very strong leverage over North Korea. We would like to further strengthen our coordination with China, and we would like to see strong action taken by China vis-à-vis North Korea in the coming months. These activities by North Korea are defiant challenges to the international community. They are clear violations of series of United Nations Security Council resolutions, and there is a clear danger of proliferation of nuclear and missile technologies. The international community has been working for a peaceful solution to this issue. The ultimate goal, of course, is denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and abandonment of all ballistic missile programs by North Korea. But when we talk about peaceful solution, we have to be fully aware of the lessons we painfully learned through our previous engagements with North Korea. We entered into a number of agreements with North Korea, but they were not sincerely upheld by the North. Rather, they were used by the North to secretly continue their development programs. That was the case for the framework agreement, the six-party talks, and also so-called the Leap Day Agreement. Our dialogue with North Korea has to be a meaningful dialogue. We must not engage in a dialogue for the sake of dialogue. In order to create right conditions, circumstances for such a meaningful dialogue, we have to change the strategic calculation of the North Korean leadership. How can we do that? The only way, it seems, at this moment, is to increase pressure on North Korea. Diplomatic, economic, and military pressure combined. The Trump administration's stated position, all options are on the table, together with enhanced military presence in the region, including 2 aircraft carrier battle groups in the Sea of Japan this week, sends a clear message to North Korea, and Japan strongly supports that. At last week's meeting between Prime Minister Abe and President Trump, they agreed, 2 leaders agreed, to further strengthen pressure on North Korea, including by introducing additional sanctions. International community has to be united in applying stronger pressure on North Korea. In this regard, we welcome the latest United Nations Security Council resolution adopted unanimously today, designating additional sanction targets. This unanimous adoption is a clear demonstration of the international consensus that we need to strengthen further pressure on North Korea at this moment. There may be an argument that these pressures will not change North Korean actions, and the only way to deal with the issue is to de-escalate the tension and engage in dialogue with North Korea. But as I said, dialogue we will have with North Korea has to be a meaningful dialogue. And recent launches clearly demonstrated that they are not ready for such a dialogue. The time is not ripe yet. So I'd like to reiterate my call for the international community to strengthen pressure on North Korea in order for us to have a meaningful dialogue with them so that we can have a peaceful solution to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Yamada, for a clear presentation of Japan's perspective on the North Korea problem. This session is not entitled North Korea's nuclear challenges, but obviously North Korea is the main topic under discussion. So, Dr. Major General Yao, a Chinese perspective, please. You no longer speak for the Chinese government, but maybe you will reflect some views.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for your kind introduction. And also the 5 minutes for me. It's a rule-based session, so I must pay attention to the time. I will make 3 points. First, nuclear dangers existed on the Korean Peninsula well before the DPRK developed its nuclear capability. During the Cold War, nuclear umbrellas from the Soviet Union and United States had covered both Koreas. Russia withdrew its umbrella to the DPRK after the Cold War. The United States, however, retained its umbrella and is called the extended deterrence to the ROK, although it did withdraw all the tactical nuclear weapons from ROK. The change in power balance and the labeling of the DPRK as one of the rogue states, state sponsors of terrorism, and axis of evil gave it a deep sense of insecurity. It has come, and I think it is wrongly, that only nuclear weapons could be the ultimate guarantee of national security. The international community, including China, has made great efforts to reverse North Korea's nuclear arming and even achieved initial successes. For example, the agreed framework in 1994 and the joint statement September 19, 2005. However, all the efforts ended in failure due to the deep-rooted hostilities between the DPRK and the United States. It is hard for the United States, based on its basic values, to accept the DPRK regime. It is even harder for it to accept a nuclear-armed DPRK, and it is almost impossible for it to accept a DPRK with the capability of striking the US territory with nuclear weapons. On the other hand, the DPRK could not be assured of its security unless it possesses the power to offset US superiority by an asymmetric way. So as we can see, the US and the DPRK are the major opposing players in the nuclear issue who actually hold the key to the lock. My second point, China is a major stakeholder in the security of Korean Peninsula. Nuclearization of any form is detrimental to China's national interests. DPRK's nuclear program and its nuclear tests in China's vicinity pose a nuclear safety challenge to China. The nuclear issue promoted the United States and its allies to adjust military deployment in Northeast Asia, expand military exercises, deployed BMD systems, and disrupt military balance on the peninsula, as well as strategic stability between China and the United States. And growing increased probability of military conflicts and chaos would jeopardize China's security and economy. In addition, DPRK's nuclear weapon program is in violation of several, up to 10 today, UN Security Council resolutions and the International Non-Proliferation Treaty mechanism. China, as one of the permanent members of the UN Security Council and also a major supporter of the Non-Proliferation Treaty regime, has the responsibility to denuclearize the peninsula. This brings me to my last point. China is not, and will not be a bystander in the nuclear issue. It has devoted itself to solution of this issue as a stakeholder. The most notable endeavor China made was from 2003 to 2007. For 5 years, China worked very hard and facilitated carefully the negotiations. First, the six-party talks, and then the three-party talks, and then the six-party talks, and later produced, as I just mentioned, the joint statement in 2005. China has been calling, so what should we do now? China has been calling for resumption of six-party talks. Recently, China has put forward a proposal of suspension for suspension, which calls for the DPRK to suspend its nuclear and missile activities, and for the United States and ROK to suspend their massive military exercise. This could generate positive dynamics and brings the two key players back to the negotiating table. Once negotiations start, China's dual-track approach could be implemented, which seeks parallel progress in denuclearization on the one hand and the establishment of a peace mechanism on the Korean Peninsula on the other hand. We hope that suspension for suspension serves the near-term goal of reducing tension and reserving the negative dynamics, while the dual-track approach would not only pave the way for denuclearization, but also initiate the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. China has provided a framework, and China is open to suggestions and ideas from all sides, as long as it is conducive to restarting the negotiations, achieving the goal of denuclearization, and maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Major General Dr. Yao. I will now turn to Major General retired Professor Ha Jungyul.
I would like to speak in Korean.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this very meaningful event. Today, I'm going to share with you my comments, but I would like to note in advance that this does not represent the Korean government's stance, and this is strictly my personal opinion. I believe that the new government of the Republic of Korea's #1 priority at the moment is addressing North Korea's nuclear issue. North Korea is undertaking dual pursuit of nuclear weapons development and economic growth in order to maintain its regime and power. I believe that North Korea will continue to develop its nuclear weapons and missile capabilities. North Korea is going to develop its nuclear weapons and missile programs in order to give sense of pride to its people, to respect the Kim Jong-un regime, and also to cement internal solidarity, and also to use it in order to undertake a socialist revolution to launch a war of unification. Despite many economical and diplomatic challenges that North Korea faces, for this reason, I believe that North Korea will utilize all the available resources in order to develop its nuclear and missile capabilities. So far, North Korea has had 5 nuclear tests, and through this process, it was able to miniaturize, diversify, and also lighten the nuclear weapons. 2016, September 9th, North Korea conducted 5th nuclear test in North Hamgyong province. And compared to previous tests, the explosive power actually increased, and also the ballistic missile mountable nuclear warheads were also seem to have been developed. North Korea owns more than 1,000 missiles, including Scud Nodong and improved Nodong missiles and Musudan missiles, and probably they are already deployed, which can pose a serious threat. And also, it's developing its missile programs in order to carry those nuclear warheads. As you all will concur, I believe that North Korea's nuclear program can serve as a threat to not only Northeast Asia, but also to the entire world. Recently, the nuclear test or the missile test that North Korea conducted has a target range of 5,000 kilometers, and this can threaten China, Japan, Russia, and other Southeast Asian countries. If there is any nuclear war on the Korean Peninsula, I believe that the effects can be felt throughout the Northeast Asian region. The Kim Jong-un administration and also its regime is very unstable. And I believe that both internal and external environment is not that favorable for the Kim Jong-un regime in North Korea. North Korea cannot simply pursue the nuclear armament and cannot pursue the route of reform and open up. So it's in a big dilemma. I believe that there are a few options on the table for North Korea to choose. I believe that North Korea's nuclear and missile programs are threatening Northeast Asian region. But because of differences among the countries in the region, I believe that we were not able to have a peace mechanism in the region. Going forward, I believe that there can be even more conflict over North Korea's nuclear issues, and so for that reason, we need to work out common solutions. I believe that things are very uncertain and volatile at this moment, and so I believe that we need to have strategic thinking and come up with multifaceted policy coordination and flexibility to counter North Korea's nuclear threats. I believe that countries in the region need to come together in multilateral dialogue to address North Korea's nuclear issue in a concerted manner. The Korean government seeks nuclear non-proliferation. We are going to utilize Korea-U.S. alliance assets and also enhance our military readiness, and also engage ourselves with neighboring countries in diplomatic efforts in order to build peace on the Korean Peninsula. To this end, the new Korean government is going to apply pressure against North Korea in order to address North Korea's nuclear issue. But at the same time, the new administration is going to pursue diplomatic efforts in order to counter North Korea's nuclear threats. The new government of the Republic of Korea's #1 priority should be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula by abandoning the nuclear program of the North. And I believe that we need to adopt a step-by-step approach. The first step would be to prevent a nuclear war in the Korean Peninsula that could destroy both Koreas. I believe that we need to strengthen Korea-U.S. alliance and also improve inter-Korean relations and also settling peace mechanism on the Korean Peninsula. I believe that the new government's resources needs to be concentrated on this. The second stage would be to freeze and gradually scrap nuclear weapons in the North. We believe that we need to have six-party talks or other multilateral dialogue mechanism. And by doing so, I believe that we can introduce peace mechanism. The third stage is to take into consideration North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. And also, given political and military conditions, I believe that the ultimate goal should be to accelerate the complete disposal of North Korea's nuclear weapons and also ballistic missiles. The new government has to work closely with the U.S., China, and Japan in order to resume six-party talks and also try to address all these issues in a single undertaking. If that's not possible, we have to first try to freeze nuclear program in the North, stop nuclear proliferation, and also try to scrap nuclear development in the North in a phased manner. At the end of the day, I believe that we need to be flexible and using flexible mutual reciprocity, we need to press North Korea and also engage North Korea in dialogue in order to peacefully resolve North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. And at the same time, I believe that we need to develop military assets and capabilities in order to effectively counter North Korea's missile threats. And third, I believe that we also need to work for peaceful reunification of the two Koreas by extending humanitarian assistance and promoting private exchanges between the two Koreas. Ultimately, I believe that we need to build peace on the Korean Peninsula with cooperation with Northeast Asian region and international community. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor General Ha, for that clear exposition of the new government's position. So if I could finally ask Deputy Secretary General Belliard for some perspective from Europe.
Thank you. The EU is concerned by what is going on in North Korea, not only by its nuclear missile program. When I say the EU, it's about the institutions. It's about its member states. 4 of them today are members of Security Council, and 2, as you know, are permanent members of the Security Council and have a nuclear capacity. The concern is a nuclear threat, the missile program, which is a violation of the non-proliferation regime and of UN Security Council resolutions, and globally speaking, a violation of the international order. We are also worried by the chemical and the biological program. We saw what happened in Kuala Lumpur. We are also concerned by the cyber program. We saw what happened recently in Bangladesh. We are concerned by the human rights violations, massive human rights violations. We are concerned by the humanitarian situation. Situation in North Korea is a disaster, and some of our member states which have embassies in North Korea have programs, development programs and humanitarian programs. So what can the EU do? Like others, act before North Korea gets an operational nuclear capacity, increase political pressure, adopt measures, sanctions. The EU implements all Security Council resolutions, plus, and sometimes it is not known enough, we also have autonomous sanctions, mainly on human rights violation. Also prevent North Korea to get hard currency through financial and commercial means. There is now an ongoing debate within the EU on the question of remittances, North Korean workers, and there are a number of them in Europe. If conditions are ripe, and only if conditions are ripe, EU, of course, is in favor of dialogue. And the EU has in mind its own experience of the peace talks on Iran. We had a complex, long, many years process, P5, plus Germany, plus Iran, plus EU. EU had a specific role in the middle, a bridge, a glue, a capacity to talk to all, capacity to be accepted by all, to have the USA and Iran in the same place, and that was not simple. I'm not saying here it is a recipe for something, but just to mention it, we could imagine a format with P5 plus Japan, North Korea, and South Korea. And if the parties would agree, could imagine a situation where the EU could bring this capacity, this type of neutrality, respect by parties. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General. By your precise presentation, you undercut the joke I was going to make about how each of the presenters went over the 6-minute time limit. You all went to 7 minutes, but you made it up. So on average, it was 6 minutes, so that's fine. But I'm going to be more strict now during the Q&A session, and you will please give me your attention in the usual manner of turning your placard this way, and I will turn my head the same way to be able to read it. There was mention of the 6-party talks, and we only have 3 of those members represented at the panel, plus the European Union. So I'm going to give a preference, a priority to any representatives of the other 3 parties. If there's anybody representing North Korea, please draw my attention, or Russia, or United States. I will give you priority. Seeing none, I just will just say one thing about the United States position. Dr. Yao, you said it's hard for the United States to recognize North Korea. But in fact, the United States did, in the 6-party talks joint statement in 2005, recognized the sovereignty of the DPRK. And I expect that the United States would be willing to repeat that if North Korea were also to repeat its pledges in the 6-party talks of denuclearization, which of course North Korea has not been willing to do. So let's start off. Mr. Ellison, you've been in just attention. So
thank you very much, Mark.
I'll take about 4 or 5 to begin with, and we'll see how it goes.
John Ellison, United Kingdom, sir. Yesterday there was another round of UN sanctions, which included individual sanctions against 14 individuals from North Korea. Nobody can really think that's going to change anything, and it's not going to fit in with what Mr. Yamada was saying about changing North Korea's strategic approach. If one's going to have serious sanctions and avoid a war, the sort of things that are needed are an oil embargo, interception of cargo ships, and most of all, perhaps, stopping their financial relationships, stopping banks trading with them. I'd be particularly interested in the view of Major General Dr. Yao as to whether China, if pressed, would support that as an alternative to having a war.
Okay, if you will keep that question in mind for when we come back to the panel, I'll ask, is it Mr. Park? Yes, please.
Thank you. So, to my understanding, both General Yao and General Ha agreed to resume the six-party talks for resolving the North Korea's nuclear issue. But difference between like the statement by Yao and Ha is although Yao introduced the condition for the resumption, which is suspension of North Korea's nuclear development capability and also suspension of RAG and US military exercises. So I want to ask to Mr. General Ha, the new ROK government can afford the suspension of the combined military exercise for the resumption of the six-party talks. And to General Yao, if the Korea and the US is not going to suspend the military exercise, what kind of other condition you can introduce for the resumption of the six-party talks?
Okay, thanks very much. I'll ask Professor Nishihara, please.
Is it working? Yeah, fine. Thank you. Thank you for the presentations. I feel personally that any of the sanctions against North Korea would not be working, would not work, particularly China, which has been urged to do more on the sanctions. I've not been really observing the assignments or expectations given by other countries. In fact, probably it is wrong for us to urge China to do the complete sanctions on China, because if Chinese really accomplish its sanctions against China, against North Korea, and if it works, then that would be a victory for Chinese diplomacy. That would weaken the United States' influence in the region, Japanese influence in the region, and that is not good for the stability of the region. Therefore, I would feel that the sanctions should be taken more elaborately by other countries like Japan, like other countries in Asia. For example, you have not done any of the sanctions or boycotts of the Chinese, North Korean ships coming in and out in the Sea of Japan. These should be something that we should be thinking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nishihara. Mr. Morrissey, please.
Yeah, hi, Bob Morrissey from Raytheon Company. This is for Major General Dr. Yao. You had mentioned in your statement that the deployment of the THAAD system was a destabilizing piece of equipment, destabilizing for the region. As I know it, THAAD is a defensive system. It has a surveillance radar and ballistic missile interceptors, and as far as I've known, it hasn't shown any offensive capability. Can you explain how this destabilizes the region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask for a couple more. William Chung, please.
Thank you, Mark. I'm piqued by your comment about the U.S. recognition of the DPRK, and I remember John Bolton saying that the best non-nuclear DPRK formulation is no DPRK. So that's an interesting thought for you. But I was intrigued by General Yao's comment about the kind of the insecurity that drives the DPRK search for nuclear weapons. And very interestingly, I spoke to two DPRK diplomats earlier this week, and they were talking about the need for actually, the DPRK only has one demand, which is to convert an armistice into a peace treaty. What was the armistice from 1953 into a peace treaty? But my question for General Yao is that the Chinese formulation for a freeze, I want to ask you about the details about it. So is there a timeline attached to, say, suspension of DPRK nuclear missile tests? Is there a timeline for suspension of US ROK exercises before you take it to the next stage? Thank you.
I'd like to give priority to anybody who has a comment or question that is not directed at Major General Yao. Okay, please.
Thank you. Taro Kono from the Japanese Parliament. My question is for Mr. Yamada and maybe to the chair. North Korea has gaining capability to hit United States directly with ICBM and a nuclear warhead. How can we convince the Japanese people or the North Korean regime or China that US extended deterrence is actually working? How can we convince people that US government might sacrifice Los Angeles or Seattle to protect Tokyo? If we cannot convince the Japanese people with that, there is a growing demand from part of Japanese that Japan need to have a nuclear weapon to protect itself. I don't think that's a good idea, but in order to do that, we really need to convince the Japanese people. What do you think about how to do it?
Thank you, Parliamentarian Kono. Anybody else who has a question, like, okay, I see one here and then one here, and then I think we're going to come back to the panel. I can't quite read it, so go ahead. Sorry. It's upside down now.
When we look at the increase in number of missile tests and nuclear tests by North Korea, there arises a few questions. A, from where the money is coming. B, there arises also a suspicion that North Korea is kind of, has been a key supplier of nuclear technologies. It's a proliferation issue, and key supply of missiles technology and nuclear technology to certain rogue states. Is the money for these tests coming from rogue states, or these rogue states, are these rogue states using North Korea to test their missile programs? Because, if they do it, they will be subjected to sanctions. Sometimes back, Pakistan's nuclear program was, there was suspicion that they were getting the know-how from the North Koreans. If the panel could explain this to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the last comment question in this round, it will go to Mr. Champion.
For General Ha, you mentioned when you were speaking the possibility of reunification, and this comes up quite often, and it always makes me wonder whether that in itself is helpful, and whether the idea of reunification should just be put on ice until things like a peace treaty and the nuclear issue are resolved, and simply there should be a moratorium on discussing it. Thank you.
Okay, well, a series of questions. Professor Yao, you had the most, so you're going to go last. To give you more time to think about it. General Ha, you had two, so you go second to the last. And I think Mr. Yamada, you had one specifically, and as did I. And then you can also discuss the question posed by Mr. Ellison about embargo, stopping banks, and very serious kinds of pressure. So why don't you go first, Mr. Yamada?
Thank you. And Mr. Kono, thank you very much for your question. And yes, credibility of extended deterrence provided to Japan by the United States has to be maintained through this very difficult period. And the one strongest way to ensure that credibility is the declaration at the highest level of the government. And when Prime Minister Abe visited Washington, D.C. and Florida in February, the two leaders issued a joint statement in which the United States confirms that its security guarantee to Japan includes both conventional and nuclear. And it's very rare to have a leaders level document to talk about extended deterrence, meaning nuclear deterrence against any threat to Japan. And we very much appreciate the Trump administration's willingness to make that joint statement, to make the international community, especially the North Korea, understand that strong commitment by the United States for the security of Japan. And as the moderator said, we don't have US representative on the panel, who I hope can join me to reassure and declare to the international community of this strong US commitment to extended deterrence. And that kind of declaration should be supported by actions. And as you can see, in recent months, there are heightened tempo of joint military exercises between Japan, the United States. And this week, we are conducting joint military exercises in the Sea of Japan with Carl Vinson and Ronald Reagan, 2 aircraft carriers currently in the Sea of Japan. And also this week, we conducted joint flight operations with US strategic bomber and Japanese Air Self-Defense Force aircraft. So these actions, I hope, underpins the strong commitment by the leader of the United States for this extended deterrence.
Thank you, Mr. Yamada. Just because I was also asked this question, let me add to this a couple of points. The United States military presence in East Asia acts as a kind of tripwire, which I think ensures American involvement in any conflict. The question about decoupling that is often asked used to be asked in Europe. Charles de Gaulle used to say, would America trade Paris, trade New York for Paris? He stopped asking, Europeans stopped asking this question because the United States never wavered in its commitment to European defense, even though the Soviet Union had hundreds of ICBMs directed against American cities. The United States never wavered in the face of Chinese ICBMs, which were dozens. The fact that North Korea will develop a small number, I don't think would change America's commitment. Plus, there's an additional factor that there are developing anti-ballistic missile defenses which are showing some capabilities which didn't exist in the Cold War. So now, Major General Professor Ha, to respond.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to thank for that 2 questions. First and foremost, I would like to talk about the 6-party talks issue. So I don't like to focus on the 6-party talks, but I think that multilateral dialogue is important. I believe that having that window of dialogue is very important going forward. However, we have to also think about the preconditions of having that multilateral dialogue. First and foremost, the question was whether or not we can stop Korea-US military exercise. I don't think so. I think the Korea-US alliance has to be reinforced. And I believe that the planned Korea-US military exercise has to continue. North Korea has been claiming that we stop. North Korea also does not have as a precondition that we stop that military drill between the US and Korea. And we can also think about other preconditions. Well, I believe that the ultimate goal for all of us is the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But in order to have North Korea on the dialogue, on the negotiation table, if we use it as a precondition, I think that things will get worse. That was the case in the past. North Korea will not budge. So I believe that the precondition has to be to freeze North Korea's nuclear program. So that way we can lure North Korea to the negotiation table. And North Korea, yes, is asking for a peace treaty. Well, North Korea and the US need to come together, and I think that it's an agenda that we can discuss on the table. Yes, it's going to be bumpy, road. However, I believe that in order to address North Korea's nuclear challenge, we, if necessary, should take that bumpy road. And as for the second question, reunification of the two Koreas, is that possible, or is it okay to talk about it at this moment? Well, in my personal view, I believe that in order to address North Korea's nuclear issue, the fundamental solution is to have reunification. South Korea led unification, and having a reunified democratic country in the Korean Peninsula will be the ultimate solution to North Korea's nuclear issue. At the moment, the two Koreas are at loggerheads, and we have yet to address North Korea's nuclear issue at the moment. Therefore, in the previous South Korean government, the humanitarian assistance from South Korea to North Korea, and also the people-to-people private exchanges were all suspended. And because of these measures, we were not able to engage in any type of dialogue between the two Koreas. So, as a beginning, if we can gradually open the window for dialogue between the two Koreas, it would be great. I understand that there are UN sanctions, so we need to implement UN sanctions. But at the same time, if we have that dialogue channel, then I believe that we can make gradual improvements. When it comes to reunification, it's an assignment or duty that the two Koreas need to address, and therefore I believe that the two Koreas need to have a in-depth dialogue, and if possible, I think that gradually we need to lay the groundwork to have a reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ha. Professor Yao, please.
So the questions first, actually the question is directed to Mark. That's about the U.S. formal recognition of DPRK as a sovereign state. Yeah, that question was addressed to you, but I want to make some comments. I think that it did happen, but until very recently, I don't think the United States government had clearly and repeatedly stated that regime change is not a goal in Korean Peninsula. And it is in its statements, government statements, it is very clear that regime change is a very, very highly desirable, even if not sought or tried as an objective, but it is very desirable. So that's why, and it is also based on the assessment that the DPRK regime cannot last for long. So that's why the United States government had waited for years for something to happen. So my question to me, that is, sanctions, is it a better choice or a better alternative than war? Sure, it is, but I do have doubt whether sanctions can only purely by imposing sanctions can we solve the nuclear issue. It has to be combined with other means. And China has been, I think, truly and fully implemented the United Nations Security Council resolutions. And we should not forget that almost all the resolutions, it's not only about sanctions against the DPRK, it is also request for relevant parties to resume talks, to come back to the six-party talks. And this part of UN Security Council resolution has not been implemented or even headed to. And for the suspension for suspension suggestion or proposal by China, what if ROK and US does not agree to a suspension? Or what more China can offer? I think that this question should be asked by me, that if you are not going to accept China's or even consider China's proposal, what else can you counter propose? Because if we all want to be constructive, conducive, China is open to ideas, as I said, and creative ideas. If we have the same purpose, that is denuclearization, the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. If we cannot do this, what else can we do? So I don't know how to answer it. I think this should be my question. And also from the Japanese gentleman, that is a question also about sanctions. Can China stop ships, DPRK ships to Chinese ports? I think China will do anything that is required by the UN Security Council resolutions. As for unilateral sanctions by China, that's government decision, and it will be based on China's national interest. But so far, as sanctions are concerned, China would implement those which had been requested by the UN Security Council resolutions. And the question about THAAD, why China is opposed to THAAD, I'm really actually prepared for that question. So it takes maybe more time. I think firstly it has to do with the regional security framework. It's not a purely military issue. It is not only about one or two pieces of weapon systems. It has to do with the security arrangement that United States has set up and how it will evolve in the future. And China is concerned that such architecture, the ballistic missile defense architecture, which has been gradually taking shape in East Asia, would not only exclude but also target against China. So this is detrimental to China's long-term interest. And at a military level, the BMD issue, if it is, because it's not only in the ROK, it is also in Japan and in Taiwan, and also in Australia. So, and maybe later in other Eastern Asia countries. So by setting up this kind of ballistic missile defense systems, interoperability could be boosted through early warning and surveillance data sharing, combined command and control and interception coordination. And enhanced interoperability among all US allies in the region can lead to transformation of bilateral alliances to trilateral or even multilateral alliances, if necessary. This would be, of course, not something that China would like to see, especially when we consider Taiwan, because Taiwan has the PAVE-PAR radars, which can be integrated into other ballistic missile defense systems. And also it has to do with China's strategic deterrence capability. Actually, China is very opposed to the radar systems, especially the radar system, the X-band radar in the THAAD system, which would have the capability to track Chinese strategic missiles, and which can have a surveillance range far beyond DPRK and deep into China's inland. So And this effect can be, their effect can be summarized first, early warning from earlier detection. Thus, better chance to intercept. Second, prolonged tracking system, tracking time, and then more effective decoy identification. And third, better chance to identify and intercept the real warhead once decoys are detected, identified, and disregarded. So what I'm talking about is Chinese ballistic, Chinese ICBMs. And in classical deterrence theory, strategic offensive capability sometimes is more defensive in nature and stabilizing than strategic defensive capabilities. So the logic goes.
Don't read the whole thing. I think
So,
you have to stop at some point.
do I?
Yeah. It's
Okay,
too long.
the last thing is that I know my ROK friends always view China's opposition to the THAAD as unjustified. But THAAD system is not the best BMD system to protect ROK. It cannot protect Seoul, and in that city, Seoul, more than half of the ROK population lives.
Okay.
I have more questions.
Oh, do you have more written comments?
No. I have more questions. So to William Chuang, and suspension for suspension details on it. If we have not been receiving positive responses from relevant parties, I don't think China has to make any detailed plans or timelines.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Yao. We have time for one more round, and we'll get to you. So start with Chris Nelson, then Matt Cutty, and we'll keep going till we get everybody.
Thank you very much, Mark. Chris Nelson, the Nelson Report. I've been writing about this stuff for over 30 years. It seems more like 100 sometimes. Let's try to move ahead to where would we be if we get negotiations going again? Because we can spend the next 6 weeks talking about what we've been talking about now, which is very important. But if we get negotiations going again, and if the initial focus is on a freeze, how do we answer the question that inherently negotiating a freeze accepts North Korea as an existing nuclear power with the weapons it has right now? We're not talking about having them give up. That's sort of what we want, some nebulous future date if everything all works out. But in the meantime, their weapons will be in place and available. And obviously, I don't speak for the US government, but anybody who suggests that kind of thing in Washington immediately hears all the reasons why we can't possibly accept that. No way we're going to accept that. So how do we deal with that fundamental disconnect between saying a freeze is the only practical immediate set of steps with the reality that it would be seen as throwing the Non-Proliferation Treaty down the drain, and in any event accepting the existing unsustainable threat from North Korean nukes? How do we deal with that? And on that, I have to say, most of us, our reaction is China's rejection is that it would give us 5 minutes extra warning on the end of the world, I think we need to find a better way to talk about that.
Thanks, Chris. Matt Cutty, and then Mr. Panda.
Thanks, Mark. Matthew Cossie, IISS. Two very quick questions or points of clarification to Major General Dr. Yao. The first is picking up William's point about the freeze for freeze deal. I'd be interested in knowing the genesis of the idea and whether you've had any feedback from the North Koreans with regard to whether they would be interested in a freeze for freeze. The second question is with regard to unilateral sanctions. We saw earlier this week that the US have imposed sanctions on Russian individuals and companies. I'd be interested in your predictions on what China might do if the US were to sanction China, unilateral sanctions against China. And just very finally to the panel, to pick up on the previous question, what do you think could possibly be offered to North Korea in order to get them to the negotiation table? We've mentioned a peace agreement and security guarantees, but feasibly, do you think there's any actual chance of a meaningful negotiation before North Korea has developed its ICBM capability? Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Mr. Panda, then you and Graham.
Thank you for the floor. Ankit Panda with the Diplomat magazine. I have a very short and quick question for Major General Dr. Yao. My question is, what is the status of the 1961 China-North Korea Treaty of Friendship, specifically Article 2, in a Korean Peninsula contingency? How would China interpret and choose to apply or not apply that treaty? Thank you.
Thank you for the brevity of the question. You and Graham, and then Mr. Minohara.
Thank you, Mark. Just to elaborate on Kono-san's earlier question about extended deterrence, my view is a rather bleak one that North Korea will not enter into talks, given how close it is to the nuclear ICBM finishing line. It will get over that line and then possibly enter into talks on that basis. On the basis of that assumption, if North Korea has that capability, what will then be the implications for extended deterrence, not only for Japan, as the question has been asked, but I put the question to Major General Ha as the South Korean representative on the panel as well. Second question, Ankit Panda has beaten me to it on the China 1961 treaty, but just to work in a nuclear element to that, to Major General Yao, has China ever historically considered offering extended deterrence to DPRK? And if DPRK would not accept that, given that it is a treaty partner, what is the reason for that?
Thanks, Graham. So Professor Minohara, and then Charles Poe.
Tosh Minohara, Kobe University. I have two short questions. One is to Mr. Yamada and the other to General Yao. You're very popular today. To Mr. Yamada, you talked about how we need to force change to DPRK's strategic calculation. In order to do that, you said increased pressure, effective embargo. Wearing a historian's cap in 1941, it was a very effective embargo which changed Japan's strategic calculation very drastically. So what assurances do we have that this change in strategic calculation is a positive one rather than a negative one? And to General Yao, General Ha, in his earlier reply, said that the best solution or the ideal solution was to have a democratic and presumably pro-US Korea, unified Korea. Is this something that China can live with? I would be under the assumption that China would have some kind of buffer, something that's more pro-China in its orientation. So I just wondered.
Thank you, Professor. Charles, please, and then is it General Trung? Please.
No, well, just a quick one. It's, I suppose, really to all the panel, and it's a question of timing. It does seem to me that North Korea must be close to its maximum leverage roundabout now. It has advanced a long way now towards attaining the capability it wants of being able to strike the US mainland. When it gets too close to that point, then its leverage diminishes, because by then the chance of use of force by the US reaches its maximum point. So surely this must be roundabout now, the time when the North Koreans should be seriously interested in discussion and negotiation. I wonder whether the members of the panel will agree with that.
I'm sorry, can I just ask you to elaborate on this point? Why would now be the maximum point before they have an ICBM?
Well, because they can use the threat of obtaining the capability as leverage to getting the most favorable conditions for negotiation. Once they're very close to it, or indeed have obtained it, then the US riposte that we are prepared to use force must become more of a risk for them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is it General Trung, please? And then after that, Mr. Kim?
Tôi ủng hộ một bán đảo Triều Tiên thống nhất và không có vũ khí hạt nhân.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, Vietnam, we support a denuclearized Korean Peninsula and reunified Korea, two Koreas.
Và Việt Nam cam kết chấp hành nghiêm túc tất cả các nghị quyết của Liên Hợp Quốc về vấn đề vũ khí hạt nhân ở bán đảo Triều Tiên.
And Vietnam also support all the resolution of the UN Security Council to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula.
Và điều đó được khẳng định trong tuyên bố chung Việt Nam-Hoa Kỳ khi Thủ tướng Nguyễn Xuân Phúc vừa rồi đi thăm Hoa Kỳ.
Has been clearly stated in the joint statement between our Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc and President Donald Trump after the recent visit to US of our Prime Minister.
Về các giải pháp để tháo gỡ cái ngọn nổ vũ khí hạt nhân ở Triều Tiên, thì tôi phát biểu theo cương vị là cá nhân. Tôi xin nêu mấy nhận xét sau đây.
Regarding to the denuclearization and de-escalation of the issues in the Korean Peninsula, I would like to speak in my own name as a researcher.
Biện pháp bao vây, cấm vận, trừng phạt, nó là hai mặt của vấn đề, và nó là chúng tôi gọi là con dao hai lưỡi. Có mặt tích cực nhưng có mặt tiêu cực, đó là kích thích cái sự hận thù và kích thích Triều Tiên càng ngày càng muốn sở hữu vũ khí hạt nhân.
Sanctions and penalties and embargoes, they are, for us, we can call it a two-bladed knife. On the one hand, it can give pressure to the regime. However, on the other hand, it intensify the hatreds and oppositions as well.
Việt Nam chúng tôi cũng đã 21 năm bị chia cắt đất nước. Tôi hiểu nỗi đau của nhân dân Triều Tiên khi đất nước bị chia cắt.
For Vietnam, we have suffered more than 20 years of separations. We understand the pain of the Korean peoples.
Vì vậy tôi ủng hộ tướng Du và tướng ngài Ha đã nói rằng chỉ có tháo gỡ hận thù và đưa đất nước Triều Tiên đến thống nhất mới là con đường tốt nhất để giải giáp vũ khí hạt nhân.
So I support what Major General Yao as well as Professor Ha have said. The only way to defuse and completely settle the issues in the Korean Peninsula is to look forward for the reunification of the two sides of the Korea. That is the only way for the everlasting peace in the Korean Peninsula.
Càng đưa vũ khí, càng đưa quân đội, càng tổ chức diễn tập ở đây, thì lòng hận thù càng tăng lên, thì vấn đề giải vũ khí hạt nhân càng ra đời.
The more weapons you deploy in the area, the more exercises you conduct in the areas, it will fuse more hatreds in this region, and it will not do any good to the defusal of the issues.
Vì vậy, cộng đồng thế giới, nhất là các nước châu Á của chúng ta, phải làm sao cho Triều Tiên thấy rằng họ được tin tưởng và không lật đổ chế độ của họ, để họ cảm thấy có niềm tin và họ từ bỏ lòng hận thù để ngồi vào bàn hội nghị.
So that's why the international community, especially Asia Pacific nations, should make sure that and make it clear for the North Korean regime that they are trusted. They are they would not there any regime change possibility in the coming time, so that they have the confidence to sit down in the negotiation table to start discussing without any prejudices.
Vì vậy chúng ta tạo nên niềm tin chiến lược để nhân dân Triều Tiên và đất nước Triều Tiên không có khát vọng sở hữu vũ khí hạt nhân.
That's why we should create the strategic trust for the North Koreans, so that they will forgive their ambitions for nuclear weapons.
Vì vậy chúng tôi ủng hộ đẩy nhanh cái mối quan hệ và tổ chức cái hội nghị 6 bên Triều Tiên, và có những giải pháp giúp đỡ Triều Tiên về vấn đề kinh tế và tạo cho họ niềm tin để họ có thể từ bỏ vũ khí hạt nhân của mình. Đó là thông điệp của chúng tôi.
That's why we support the resumption of the six-party talk, and also with the assistance of the international community to the North Koreans, so that they have the confidence in all the party concerned to resume the dialogues and to eventually defuse the crisis in the Korean Peninsula, and that is our message.
Xin cảm ơn các ngài lắng nghe.
Thank you.
Thank you, General Trump. So I think I have two left that I can see. If there's anybody I can't see, get my attention somehow. Professor Kim and then Professor Huang.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I was planning to just listen today, but I couldn't help myself but to react to the Major General Yao's comment on the argument for the THAAD. Frankly, I was expecting better explanation of why this deployment of THAAD in Korea will hurt or disrupt the strategic stability between the United States and China. But actually, your answer to that was not that satisfactory, because you mentioned about the strategic stability between the United States and China, right? That means you are assuming the war situation between the United States and China, right? The most important thing is ICBM. The Earth is round. Earth is round. If you retaliate or attack to the United States, your ICBM has to fly through Arctic, right? Not over the Korean Peninsula. Then what's the use for our THAAD system? Not ours, I mean, it's your US system, right? Even though you insist it can detect 2,000 kilometers, that range, Earth is round. That height, it cannot detect, okay? So it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect anything. Okay, second, then maybe you can think about some kind of a regional conflict with the United States. Just like A2AD, right, situation. So you're going to attack aircraft carriers of the United States approaching to your mainland. Or you can shoot USFK, US base in South Korea, right, with ballistic missiles. Then we need it. If you shoot ballistic missile to US base in South Korea, it's our territory still, right? Then that means it justifies the deployment of that, even that situation, more. So I don't understand why it hurts strategic stability. I understand if you insist it may affect your worry about future kind of strengthening of the United States presence here, military presence here. That kind of political argument makes sense. But militarily, it's not imminent, or even maybe the distant future, maybe 10 or 20 years even. It's not threatening at all to the the Chinese strategic capability, okay? So what do you think about that?
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. You've just invited Major General Yao to read 2 more pages. Professor Huang.
I have 5 more pages to read.
Okay. I have 2 questions to Mr. Yamada. Just last month, there were a lot of reports and messages, signals that U.S. is considering military action against North Korea. So my question is, what would be Japan's position on U.S. military action, and under what conditions would Japan join such an action? Then, second question, the Japanese defense minister talked about strengthening security cooperation with Australia, India, and Europe this morning, without mentioning relations with South Korea. Since 2015, Japan hasn't said Korea is a country that shares fundamental values with Japan. So I'm curious about Abe government to Korea's new government. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Professor Huang. Last call for any representatives of the United States, Russia, or North Korea to join this debate. I don't see any, so I can represent, yes. Well, I will, as best I can. So actually, most of the questions, again, or to China. You're the most popular person, again, at the Shangri-La Dialogue. But I think I'm going to let you go last so that if we get to the point of cutting off, I have to cut you off. So just wait a minute. Professor Ha, you had a question or two, and Mr. Yamada, you had a question. And if you want to say anything, you can say. But okay, so
Yes, thank you very much for the question. In order to resolve North Korea's nuclear issue, I mentioned how we have to first start with nuclear freeze. And one of you commented that that would be tantamount to recognizing North Korea as a nuclear power. Now, if we talk about scrapping nuclear power, weapons in North Korea, that also means the same, don't you think? We never acknowledged North Korea as a nuclear state. We never, ever accepted North Korea's nuclear weapons. And we believe that we should maintain that policy against North Korea's nuclear weapons. Ultimate goal is to scrap North Korea's nuclear weapons, but in order to reach that point, we need to make diversified efforts. And one method is to take a phased approach. And that was my suggestion earlier. As we approach North Korea in a gradual manner, then as a possible solution, maybe we can start with the freezing of North Korea's nuclear weapons. So it was only one option possible. The U.S. Defense Minister Mattis mentioned that economic and diplomatic efforts need to be first exhausted in addressing North Korea's nuclear issue. Of course, we can use economic measures to press North Korea, but Mattis also highlighted diplomatic efforts, and I believe that it's similar to highlighting the importance of dialogue. And in the process of seeking diplomatic efforts, I believe that we can also have multilateral dialogue engaging North Korea. So again, the ultimate goal of denuclearization would be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and scrapping North Korea's nuclear weapons. However, in the process, we need to think about various possible options. Second, with regard to North Korea's nuclear issue, the question was if North Korea is interested in freezing its nuclear problem and whether or not we asked North Korea whether it's willing to do so. Of course, we never did ask. But I believe that we are in a position to propose several options to North Korea. Basically, in order to address North Korea's nuclear issue, we at one point talked about launching preemptive strike. Well, it would be easier for other countries to say so. However, since South Korea is on the same Korean Peninsula, preemptive strike actually means possible destruction of South Korea as well. And it can also lead to an expanded war on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, the Korean government, and as a Korean person, I believe that it requires more in-depth discussion. Mr. Mattis highlighted the importance of diplomatic and economic efforts, and I sincerely welcome that proposal, and I support his position, and I believe that the Korean government should work with the U.S. in order to working out such measures. Finally, what can we do? Some of you may think that we need to use force in order to address North Korea's nuclear issue. And yes, of course, I believe that using force can be many options that we can use against North Korea. However, if we were to use force, then I believe that the precondition should be that using force can definitely address North Korea's nuclear problem. However, if there is still a possibility that we can address North Korea's nuclear issue using peaceful measures, then I believe that we should take that route. We need to explore more of such peaceful options and make all possible efforts before we exhaust that measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ha. Mr. Yamada, you had 2 or 3 questions posed to you. If you could answer them in no more than 2 minutes, that'd be good.
Okay, first, to answer Professor Minohara's question, how can we put effectively sanctions over North Korea? I think there are still a lot the international community can do before creating the situation Japan was in 1941. For example, as my EU colleague mentioned in his opening statement, we can still further limit the source of foreign currency flowing into North Korea, and export of North Korean workers is one way North Korea earns foreign currency. And I was very favorably impressed by my EU colleague's statement that there is a discussion going on within EU of the possible measures on this issue. And other ways to limit foreign currency income for North Korea is some limitations on iron ore export or so forth. Sorry?
Not about how to make it more effective. It was if it
Hey,
is.
sorry,
very
we just don't have time for more Q&A right now.
Okay. Then I will move on to Professor Huang's question. I wouldn't specifically answer this hypothetical question of this Japanese reaction in case of use of force. But as I said in my opening statement, it is important for the international community to try to solve the issue in a peaceful manner. And as I said, in order to solve the issue in a peaceful manner, it is time for us to increase sanctions, as I said. And I didn't really notice our defense minister's statement, which you said excluded reference to our cooperation with ROK. But as I said in my opening statement, I think in order to deal with this North Korean nuclear threat, the trilateral cooperation among us is crucial. So we very much would like to have continued strengthening of trilateral cooperation. And Prime Minister Abe, when he had telephone conversation with your new president, they had a very good conversation. And they had 2 telephone conversations. And in the first telephone conversation, your president expressed his desire to have a forward-looking, future-oriented relationship with us, and 2 leaders agreed to have an early meeting. And this week, they had another discussion on North Korean missile launch. And I think the 2 leaders were basically on the same page. So I hope, based on those telephone conversations, the 2 countries can establish stable relationship in the coming years under your new president.
Thank you, Councillor Yamada. So,
네, 감사합니다. 야 소장님, 이제 마지막 말씀드리겠습니다. 자, 3분 내에 저희가 종료를 할 예정이니 3분 내에 말씀해 주시기 바랍니다.
Nelson's question, I think that first the freeze, and then verified freeze, and then rollback, verified rollback. Verification must be an ingredient in the process. And the 5 minutes extra warning time is much, much better than the end of world. And in 5 minutes, anything could happen, especially in Hollywood movies. And what China would think if sanctioned by the United States? Never try to sanction China to push it for doing anything, because China has been sanctioned many, many times in history, and China is still under sanction by the United States and the EU. And 1961, the Chinese-Korea Peace and Friendship Treaty is still there. It is still there. And why China has not provided extended deterrence, nuclear extended deterrence to DPRK, it's a long story. I need more than 15 minutes to explain. But to put it in a very simple way, China has a nuclear policy that is no first use. And by adopting no first use policy, it is impossible to provide any country with nuclear umbrella. Nuclear weapons are reserved only to defend Chinese territory. And a democratic, unified, pro-US Korea, I think these three things are not necessarily together. A unified Korea can be a democratic, capitalist, or a mixture of anything, and it could be pro-China and pro-United States. But there is one thing that cannot be changed. That is, it is the neighbor of China, the geostrategic factor, very important here, cannot be changed. And that third comment, I just want to repeat what I said just now. I said we are opposed. China's opposition to the SAD system is mainly about the radar systems, the surveillance and tracking system, not the interceptors. So the surveillance and the tracking system do have an impact on China's ICBM capability, which would have, in turn, an impact on the strategic stability between China and United States. Also, I want to ask you a question, and we can have maybe a conversation after the session. Do you think it is good for defending Seoul, the START system? Thank you.
Great, you ended on time, and you ended in a good, positive answers. Good.
I'm a rule-based person.
Good. So we're all rule-based people. I have, okay, so before you applaud, I have 2 more rules. First of all, don't take your name cards with you to the Istana dinner. Don't take them to your hotel room. Leave them outside here or on the table. And second rule, visit the Military Balance Plus stand in the island foyer before you leave Singapore. Please join me in thanking the panelists for an interesting discussion.